Picture this. The year is 1719. A Welshman with no intention of becoming a pirate, Bartholomew. Robert steps aboard a ship as a mere navigator. He's not a rogue, not a rebel, just another skilled sailor earning his keep. But within weeks, fate twists cruelly. The ship is captured by pirates, its crew forced at sword's edge to join their ranks. Most men curse their luck, longing for escape. But Robert's, he embraced it. And within a few short months, this reluctant recruit would rise to command hundreds, carving his name into legend as the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. They called him Black Bart, and his reign was unlike any other. Where Blackbeard thrived on fear, Roberts thrived on precision. He dressed in crimson finery, sipping tea while cannons thundered. He captured more ships than any pirate before or after, over 400 in just 3 years. His flag alone, depicting a skeleton toasting death, made merchant captains tremble and surrender without a fight. But Roberts was more than just ruthless. He was disciplined. He imposed order on chaos, drafting codes of conduct that demanded sobriety, forbade gambling, and even regulated music aboard his fleet. Strange laws for men who had fled the laws of kings, yet they followed him with a loyalty born of fear and respect. He turned piracy from drunken anarchy into an empire, a floating empire that stretched from the Caribbean to the coast of Africa. And yet, his story ended in blood and fire, brought down not by mutiny or greed, but by the relentless hounds of empire. His death was so shocking, so sudden, that even his enemies whispered of curses on the wind. So how did a reluctant Welshman become the most feared pirate of the Atlantic? How did he rule with both steel and parchment, building an empire from shadows? And what secrets did Black Bart carry to his watery grave? It begins with a capture, a choice, and a crimson coat that would change history. The wind howled across the deck of the Princess, carrying with it the scent of salt and gunpowder. Bartholomew Roberts stood at the rail, his hands gripping the wood until his knuckles whitened. He had been a sailor most of his life, navigating treacherous coasts, plotting courses across the Atlantic, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. His ship had fallen to pirates. The attack had come at dawn, swift and merciless. The pirate sloop bore down on them, black sails snapping, cannons booming. Within minutes, the Princess was crippled, her crew scrambling, her captain slain. Roberts had been dragged to the quarterdeck with the others, cutlasses at their throats, pistols pressed to their ribs. The pirate captain, a gaunt man with eyes like cold steel, gave them a choice: join or die. Most cursed their luck. Some wept. A few tried to fight and were cut down where they stood. Roberts, silent, watched the sea foam red with blood. He felt no tears, no rage, only a cold certainty. Life at sea was cruel, ruled by chance as much as skill. Today, chance had spoken. When his turn came, he met the captain's gaze. He said simply. I'll join, the pirates roared, slapping his back, shoving a tankard into his hand. But Roberts did not drink. He did not cheer. He simply watched, his eyes sharp, his mind turning. At first, he was just another recruit. He hauled ropes, scrubbed decks, manned cannons. He listened more than he spoke, observing the chaos that passed for pirate life. Men drank until they collapsed, brawled until their knuckles split, cursed and gambled until the sun rose. Roberts found it distasteful, yet he adapted. He knew survival meant blending in, at least until fate offered another path. That path came sooner than expected. Weeks later, the pirate captain led a raid on a Portuguese treasure fleet. The battle was fierce, but greed outstripped caution. In the midst of the chaos, the captain was struck down, his skull shattered by the crew reeled, leaderless, their prize slipping away in the smoking aftermath. The survivors gathered to choose a new captain. Voices rose, names shouted, accusations hurled. Then, to Roberts's astonishment, someone called his name, Roberts. He froze, the eyes of hardened pirates turning toward him. He's clever, one argued. He keeps his head when the rest of us are drunk. He can read charts better than any of us, another added. He'll lead us true. Roberts shook his head. I never asked for this, but the crew roared their approval, slamming their fists on barrels, stamping their boots on the planks. By the law of pirates, the vote was binding. Bartholomew Roberts, the reluctant recruit, was now captain. He stood there, stunned, until a cutlass was thrust into his hand. The crew cheered, rum splashing, pistols firing into the air. Roberts raised the blade slowly, his crimson coat catching the sun, and in that moment something shifted. He felt the weight of power, the burn of destiny. If he was to be a pirate, he would not be like the rest. He would not squander his command on drunken folly and reckless greed. He would rule with order, with discipline, with precision. The sea was chaos, but he would carve law from its waves. Very well, he said, his voice steady. If I must be your captain, then I will be the best damned captain the Atlantic has ever seen. The men roared again, their cheers echoing across the water, and thus began the reign of Bartholomew Roberts Black Bart, the reluctant pirate who had become the scourge of empires. Yet even as the men celebrated, Roberts stared out at the horizon, his mind already racing. Power was a dangerous gift. He had not sought it, but now it was his, and he would wield it like a cutlass, sharp and unyielding. The sea had chosen him. The question was, for glory or for doom? The morning after his election, Bartholomew Roberts stood at the quarterdeck, surveying the men who had chosen him. They were a ragged sight, sunburnt, scarred, drunk on rum and bloodlust. Their laughter was coarse, their tempers short, their loyalty fragile as glass. Roberts knew well what he faced. He had not been raised to piracy. He was a navigator, a man of calculation and order. But now, by their own vote, he was captain. If he failed, they would cast him overboard as quickly as they had lifted him. The first step was law. Not the tyrant's lash of the Royal Navy, nor the hollow decrees of kings, but law written by rogues for rogues. That night, Roberts called the men together under swaying lanterns. A storm brewed on the horizon, lightning flickering, the sea restless. He let the silence hang until every eye was on him. You chose me, Captain, he said, his voice calm, even. Then hear this, I'll not lead a ship of fools. We will be pirates, but pirates with discipline. We'll take prizes not by luck, but by precision. We'll strike terror not with noise, but with silence and swiftness. And to that end, we'll write our own law. Articles, rules, a code, every man shall sign, and every man shall obey. A murmur swept the crew. Some scoffed, others frowned, but many leaned closer. They remembered the chaos of the last captain, the wasted plunder, the drunken brawls that ended in blood. Roberts drew out parchment, a quill, and ink. He began to speak the articles, his voice firm, shaping them not as suggestions, but as commandments. No gambling aboard ship, he declared. Fortune is won with steel, not dice. No women aboard, lest quarrels spill blood. Lights out at 8 bells quiet for those who rest. Watch for those who guard. Every man shall keep his cutlass sharp, pistols clean, powder dry. Neglect is punishable, and no man shall desert his post in battle. Cowards will face death at the hands of their brothers. The men shifted, exchanging looks. These were strict rules, stricter than most. But Roberts wasn't finished. Plunder shall be divided by share, equal among the crew, with the quartermaster and myself taking 1 share and a half, and gunners and officers a share and a quarter. Wounds will be compensated. Lose an arm, 400 pieces of 8. Lose a leg, 800. An eye, 100. Fingers, 50 apiece. Now they roared approval. This was fairness every man valued, every sacrifice paid in coin. Roberts knew the key to loyalty was not fear, but fairness bound in gold. At last he raised the quill. Those who agree, mark your name, or your X. Those who refuse may leave at the next port with nothing. One by one, they came forward. Rough hands signed crude letters. Some drew jagged marks. Others pressed bloody fingers to the page. When the last man had signed, Roberts lifted the parchment high. Then, by these articles, he said, we are not brigands. We are brothers. We are not rabble. We are a fleet. The cheer that followed shook the rigging. Tankards slammed, pistols fired into the air, voices bellowed shanties. But beneath the noise, Roberts saw the truth. The men were bound now. Bound not by rope, but by law. His law that transformation was swift. Within days, the ship changed. Dice were cast overboard. The rum ration was limited, the watch organized, the weapons inspected. At first, the men grumbled, but soon they saw the difference. The deck ran smoother. Fights dwindled. When the sails caught wind, the Revenge moved like a blade. Every man at his station, every order obeyed. Then came the first prize under Roberts's command, a Portuguese merchant, heavy with gold and silk, sailed lazy in the sun. Roberts ordered silence. No drunken cheers, no cannon fire until the signal. The pirates crept close, sails trimmed, decks hushed. At his command, the cannons roared as one. The black flag unfurled, and the Portuguese captain, seeing discipline instead of chaos, surrendered without firing a shot. The plunder was rich, so rich the men gaped at the chests of gold, the stacks of silk, the barrels of sugar. And when Roberts divided it, strict and fair, every man's pouch grew heavy. It was in that moment the crew truly became his. They had seen pirates who drank their fortune away, who squandered loot in brothels and taverns. But under Roberts, they had gold in hand, order on deck, and victories were not by chance, but by skill. Word spread swiftly. Merchants whispered of a pirate who dressed in crimson silk, who sipped tea on deck as cannons thundered, who led his men with iron discipline. They said his flag bore death itself, skeleton toasting with one hand and holding an hourglass in the other. Captains, upon seeing it, often struck their colors without a fight. To resist was madness. To surrender was survival. Roberts thrived on the fear. He cultivated it, appearing in battle dressed as though for a king's court crimson waistcoat, feathered hat, gold chains glittering. His calm, unnerved enemies more than roaring fury ever could, while Blackbeard lit fuses in his beard to terrify foes. Roberts needed no theatrics. His silence, his order, his precision. These were terror enough. But discipline is a double-edged sword. Not all men thrived under his rule. Some longed for the old chaos, the drunken revels, the easy plunder squandered on rum. Whispers began to stir in the dark corners of the hold. Whispers of mutiny. One night, Roberts caught them. A group of men huddled around dice, their voices low, their faces tense. He stepped from the shadows, his crimson coat catching the lantern light. "You break the articles," he said softly. They froze, eyes wide. One stammered, "It was just a game." Roberts drew his pistol in a flash, the click of the hammer silencing them. "There are no games aboard my ship. The articles are not suggestions. They are law." The men swallowed, fear in their eyes. Roberts holstered the pistol slowly, his voice like steel. "Break them again, and you will be cast overboard. Dice cannot buy your life." From then on, no man dared gamble. The months rolled on, and Roberts's legend grew. In less than a year, he captured more ships than many pirates took in a lifetime. His fleet grew as captured vessels joined his cause, flying his flag, swearing to his articles. He became not just a captain, but a ruler of the waves. Yet with each victory, his enemies multiplied. Merchants petitioned the crowns of Europe for protection. Governors sent warships in pursuit. Roberts relished it, seeing it not as danger, but as proof of his supremacy. "A king's navy against a Welsh navigator," he said once, sipping tea on deck. "That tells you all you need to know about kings." But Israel Thatcher, one of his gunners, who had watched him from the beginning, felt unease. He had seen Roberts's eyes in the lantern light, cold and sharp, seen how discipline curdled into ruthlessness. The articles that bound them in fairness also bound them in fear. And Thatcher wondered, had they traded one tyranny for another? For Roberts was no ordinary pirate. He was building something more. Not chaos, not brotherhood, but empire, and empires, Thatcher knew, do not end gently. The sea was calm that night, the stars bright, the horizon endless. Roberts stood at the rail, his crimson coat fluttering, his gaze fixed on the dark waters. "The sea bends to order," he murmured, too soft for most to hear, "and I am her law." The words chilled Thatcher to his bones. The crew had gained wealth, safety, and victories beyond count. But at what cost? In the silence of the waves, the answer lingered. Order was a chain, and chains, once fastened, are hard to break. The Caribbean whispered his name like a curse. Roberts, Black Bart, the Crimson Devil. Ships vanished. Towns trembled, and governors penned desperate letters to Europe begging for warships. Merchants who once sailed proudly now hugged the coasts, praying to slip past unseen. In taverns, sailors swore they'd seen him appear out of nowhere, his scarlet coat gleaming as cannon smoke rolled. Mothers hushed their children with stories of his flag, a skeleton raising a toast to death, an hourglass in its other hand, sands running out for all who dared resist. Bartholomew Roberts was no longer just a pirate. He was a sovereign at sea. Israel Thatcher felt it every day. The ship no longer moved like a band of rogues, but like a navy in miniature. Watches changed with precision. Cannons were cleaned until they gleamed. Even meals were timed like clockwork. The articles had reshaped chaos into rhythm, and Roberts ruled at the center of it, calm and cold, as though he were born not in a Welsh village, but on Neptune's throne itself. It began in earnest with the sugar fleet. Dozens of vessels, heavy with cane and gold, was strung along the Caribbean, bound for Europe. Roberts, ever the tactician, did not charge blindly. He sent his smaller sloops darting ahead, cutting lines of communication, capturing stragglers. Then, with his flagship bristling with cannon, he swept down upon the convoy. The battle lasted less than an hour. Seeing the crimson coat and the black flag, many ships struck their colors before a shot was fired. Those who resisted were hammered until they buckled. Roberts ordered the loot catalogued, divided, and distributed according to the articles. Each man grew fat with silver, and the legend of Black Bart grew fatter still. But Roberts was not satisfied with plunder alone. He wanted dominion. When a governor of Martinique dared to send ships in pursuit, Roberts retaliated with a vengeance. He stormed the harbor itself, cannonballs tearing through the docks, flames rising into the night. The town awoke to fire and panic, and Roberts's men dragged casks of wine and gold from the warehouses. At dawn, the town's church bell tolled not for mass, but for surrender. The pirates drank in the streets, but Roberts walked calmly among them, his coat unspotted, his face unreadable. To the people of Martinique, he left a message nailed to the governor's gate. Bartholomew Roberts was here. Pursue him again, and you will find nothing left but ash. Word of the raid spread faster than smoke. From Jamaica to Barbados, from the Carolinas to Brazil, ports fell silent at his name. Some towns even sent envoys ahead of him, bearing gifts of rum, gold, and fresh provisions, begging to be spared. Roberts accepted, of course, but with ceremony. He made each envoy kneel before the articles, swearing never to raise arms against him. In that moment, he became more than a raider. He became a monarch without a crown, a ruler whose throne was the deck of a ship and whose kingdom was the Atlantic itself. The men adored it at first. They were rich beyond imagination, feared by empires, treated like princes in the shadows of the New World. But Thatcher watched with unease. He saw the way Roberts's eyes lingered not on gold, but on order, on power. The captain no longer laughed with his men. He spoke less, commanded more, his voice sharper than the crack of cannon. Then came Africa. Roberts turned his gaze east, across the Atlantic, to the coast of Guinea, where slavers plied their cruel trade. Their ships were fat with profit, towns swollen with goods, and the governors fattened by misery. To Roberts, it was ripe for conquest. The voyage was long and brutal. Storms battered them, disease swept through the holds, men were buried at sea in weighted canvas shrouds. But at last they reached the coast, and with it, fresh plunder at Ouida. The center of the slave trade, Roberts blockaded the harbor. One by one, slave ships fell into his hands, their captains trembling, their cargo of human lives shackled and silent. Roberts freed none, but he treated them with a strange cold courtesy. He burned some ships, ransomed others, and kept what he needed. It was at Cape Lopez that his empire reached its zenith. For weeks, no ship dared move without his leave. Merchants paid tribute, towns offered supplies, and even European governors sent envoys under truce. Roberts sat in judgment on the deck of his flagship, cloaked in crimson, sipping wine as if presiding over a royal court. He drafted new articles there, expanding his code to encompass the growing fleet. He forbade drunkenness, insisted on clean clothes for battle, and even regulated music, demanding it to lift morale but never descend into chaos. His men grumbled, but none dared defy him. They had seen too often what disobedience earned: flogging, maroning, or worse. Thatcher stood in the shadows, watching as Roberts grew more like a king each day. His voice carried authority no man questioned. His word was law, sharper than any blade. The articles, once a pact among equals, had become chains forged by his hand. And yet the men still cheered him. They cheered their victories, their silver, their power. They did not see the trap closing around them. It was in Africa that Roberts's ruthlessness shone brightest, when a British ship dared fire upon his fleet. Roberts retaliated by capturing not only the ship but its escorts, hanging the officers at the yardarm as a warning. He left their bodies swaying in the sun, a ghastly signal to all who passed. The men cheered, but Thatcher turned away, bile rising in his throat. He had joined a republic of rogues. Now he served an emperor of blood, and still Roberts pressed on. In less than 3 years, he had captured over 400 ships. 400. No pirate in history had matched such numbers. His empire stretched from the Caribbean to Africa. His name cursed in London, whispered in Lisbon, and feared in every port between. But empires, like storms, cannot rage forever. Thatcher sensed it in the quiet moments. The crew grew restless despite their wealth. The articles pressed heavier, the punishments harsher. Men who once toasted Roberts now drank in silence, their eyes wary. Some whispered of breaking away, of taking their shares and fleeing before the empire cracked. Roberts, ever watchful, sensed it too. His orders grew stricter, his punishments crueler. He clung to order as though it could keep the tide from turning. One night, Thatcher found him alone at the rail, staring into the black Atlantic. His crimson coat hung heavy in the salt air, his face shadowed. "Do you ever fear it will end?" Thatcher asked quietly. Roberts's eyes did not move from the horizon. "Everything ends, but not yet. The sea bends to order, Thatcher, and I am that order. While I live, it will not end." The words chilled Thatcher, for they rang not like hope but like prophecy. The empire of Black Bart Roberts stretched vast, unchallenged, a kingdom without land but with more fear than any crown could wield. But in the silence of the waves, Thatcher heard another truth. The articles were no longer a pact. They were a cage, and cages, no matter how gilded, always drive men mad. Somewhere across the ocean, the hounds of empire were stirring, and Roberts's crimson order would one day face fire. The Atlantic was wide, but whispers travelled faster than the wind. By 1721, the name Bartholomew Roberts had become more than a name. It was a threat, a warning, a curse muttered by merchants, and a terror shouted in taverns. He was the Crimson Devil, the man who made governors quake and navies scatter. 400 ships had fallen to him, perhaps more. His empire was vast, stretching across oceans, his articles binding hundreds of rogues into a disciplined fleet. Yet empires, no matter how great, cast shadows, and Roberts's shadow was growing long. Israel Thatcher had been with him from the beginning, had watched him rise from reluctant recruit to emperor of the waves. He had cheered when plunder poured in, had fought with bloodied cutlass in storm and smoke. But now he saw cracks forming. The first crack was boredom. Pirates lived for plunder, for sudden storms of gold and fire. But Roberts's discipline demanded long patrols, blockades, and weeks of waiting. His men grew restless, their coin heavy in their pouches, their throats dry for rum, their hearts burning for the chaos they had once fled to. The second crack was punishment. Roberts brooked no disobedience. A man caught drunk on watch was flogged, until his back split. A thief who skimmed coins was marooned with pistol and shot, and one who dared speak of mutiny was hanged from the yardarm, his body left to swing until the gulls took his eyes. The articles, once a pact of fairness, had become a weapon of fear. Still, the men endured, for Roberts was cunning. He kept them rich, richer than they had ever dreamed. Spanish galleons, Portuguese traders, British merchants saw fell to his fleet. The men stuffed their pockets, swilled their rum, and tried to forget the chains that bound them. But Thatcher could not forget. He saw the way Roberts stood at the rail, his crimson coat spotless, his eyes cold as iron. He rarely laughed, never gambled, never joined their drunken revels. He was not one of them. He was above them, a king among beggars, and kings inspire fear more often than love. The storm broke off the coast of Sierra Leone. They had taken another fat prize, her hold bursting with sugar and coin. The men were drunk with victory, their laughter echoing across the deck. But when Roberts announced that half the plunder would be held in reserve for the fleet, the cheer turned to silence. One man, Jack O'Malley, an Irish rogue with a tongue as sharp as his knife, stepped forward. "Fleet be damned," he spat. "We risked our lives for that sugar. We'll have our full shares." The crew murmured agreement, stamping boots, slamming tankards. Roberts's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the hilt of his cutlass. "You signed the articles," he said coldly. "You swore to obey. This fleet is no rabble of thieves. It is order, and order requires sacrifice." O'Malley sneered. "Order? You sound more a king than a pirate, Roberts. And we left kings behind." The words cut deeper than steel. The crew muttered louder now, some shouting in agreement. Thatcher felt his stomach twist. He had heard this tone before, aboard other ships, just before blood was spilled. Roberts moved with lightning speed. His pistol was in his hand, the crack splitting the air. O'Malley fell backward, a hole in his chest. His blood pooling on the deck, silence. The only sound was the gulls screaming overhead. Roberts lowered the pistol slowly, his face unreadable. "Let this be known," he said, his voice calm but deadly. "The articles are law. Break them, and you break with me. And no man breaks with me and lives." The crew stared at the body, their faces pale. Some nodded slowly, others clenched their fists in silence. But none spoke. None dared that night. Thatcher could not sleep. He heard whispers in the dark, whispers of fear, of anger, of revenge. The men were rich, but wealth cannot silence chains forever. The next crack came weeks later. Roberts had grown bolder, hungrier. He declared a blockade of Cape Coast Castle, the English stronghold on the Gold Coast. Day after day, his fleet prowled, seizing ships, starving the port. The governors sent messengers to London, begging for warships. Merchants cursed his name, and Roberts revelled in it. "We are not pirates," he declared to his officers. "We are a nation afloat. Let kings tremble, we shall rule the waves." The words sent a chill through Thatcher. A nation of pirates. It sounded grand, but impossible. Empires had armies, fortresses, treasuries. Pirates had only sails and steel, and both wore thin with time. The blockade dragged on, weeks turning into months. The men grew restless, their patience thin. Rum ran short, food spoiled, tempers flared. Brawls broke out, dice were thrown in secret. The articles bent and frayed. One night, Thatcher found himself cornered by a whispering group. Their eyes burned with desperation. "We can't live like this," one hissed. "Roberts is mad, chasing crowns. He'll get us all killed. We should take our shares and slip away," another said. "Or slit his throat and choose anew," muttered a third. Thatcher's blood ran cold. He wanted no part of mutiny, but he could not deny their fear. Before he could answer, the alarm bell rang. Sails on the horizon. A British warship, guns bristling, bearing down. The men scrambled to their stations, fear giving way to fury. Cannons roared, smoke rolled, the sea thundered with iron. Roberts stood at the quarterdeck, calm in his crimson coat, barking orders with precision. The pirates fought like demons, their discipline sharp, their fire deadly. After hours of blood and thunder, the warship limped away, her deck afire, her crew screaming. The men cheered, but their cheer was hollow. Victory had been bought with blood, too much blood. Dozens lay dead, more wounded, the decks slick with gore. And for what? Another month of blockade, another dream of empire that seemed to crumble with every shot fired. That night, Thatcher watched Roberts at the rail, his crimson coat spattered with blood, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. He looked less a man than a statue carved from stone, unyielding. "You'll drive them to mutiny," Thatcher said softly. Roberts did not turn. Mutiny is chaos, and chaos dies. But what of us? Thatcher pressed. "What of the men who follow you?" Roberts finally looked at him, and in his eyes Thatcher saw no warmth, no mercy, only fire. "They follow me," Roberts said, "or they follow death." The words hung heavy, carried on the wind like a curse. In the weeks that followed, the cracks widened. More whispers, more brawls, more stares cast at Roberts's back when he walked the deck. The men were bound by fear, but fear does not last forever. One night, Thatcher dreamt of chains made not of iron, but of ink and parchment, of articles twisted into shackles, of a crimson-coated warden who held the key. He awoke in a cold sweat, the sound of distant waves like the rattle of lynx, and he knew the truth. Roberts's empire was vast, aye, but it was brittle. One storm, one spark, and it would shatter. The sea is patient, empires are not, and in the distance, sails gathered warships of nations long shamed, hungry for vengeance. The sea had grown dangerous for pirates, not dangerous in the old way, with storms and mutinies and hunger, but dangerous with intent. Kings who once ignored the rogues of the waves now sharpened their blades, humiliated by a Welshman in a crimson coat who ruled their shipping lanes as if Neptune himself had bent knee. By 1722. Bartholomew Roberts was a name spoken in royal courts. His exploits, written in dispatches, carried across the oceans. Black Bart, they called him. The pirate who had captured 400 ships, who had blockaded ports, who had mocked governors to their faces. He was not merely a nuisance, he was an insult, a living reminder that the crowns of Europe could not control the seas, and kings do not forgive insults, Israel. Thatcher sensed it long before Roberts admitted it. The crew whispered of strange movements, convoys, traveling under heavy guard, warships sighted in pairs, merchants sailing in fleets instead of alone. The empires were learning. The easy prizes grew fewer, the risks greater. Roberts, however, seemed unshaken. He stalked the quarterdeck like a general, his crimson coat spotless, his face calm as ever. If anything, the threat of kings made him bolder. "Let them come," he said one night, sipping wine as the lanterns swayed. The more they send, the more glory in our defiance. But Thatcher saw the shadows in his eyes. For every ship they took, the retaliation grew fiercer. For every victory, a dozen enemies sailed from Europe, hungry for his head. The climax came off the coast of West Africa. At Cape Lopez, Roberts had anchored there. His fleet spread wide, his men swollen with plunder. They were rich beyond imagining, so rich, in fact, that discipline began to fray. Dice clattered in dark corners, rum flowed, and the articles bent like brittle wood. Roberts punished where he could, flogging, marooning, executing, but even his iron will could not hold back the tide. One morning, a lookout shouted from the mast, "Sails on the horizon." A British warship, bristling with guns, bearing down. HMS Swallow, commanded by Captain Challenor Ogle, dispatched by the Royal Navy with one purpose: to kill or capture Bartholomew Roberts. The crew scrambled, panic rippling through them. Some cursed, others cheered, eager for a fight. Roberts stood calm at the rail, his eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. "Battle stations," he said evenly. "We will not run. The articles demanded it. No man was to flee in battle." And though fear gnawed at them, the men obeyed. Cannons were loaded, cutlasses sharpened, pistols primed. The deck throbbed with tension. Every eye on Roberts. Thatcher watched his captain carefully. Roberts's face was calm, but his hands gripped the rail too tightly, his knuckles pale. He knew this was no merchant prize, no convoy. This was war. As the Swallow closed, Roberts gathered his officers. His voice was sharp, commanding. "We strike first. Aim low, shatter her hull. Board if we must. But hear me well. There will be no surrender." The officers nodded, some with grim faces, others with fire in their eyes. They knew what capture meant, hanging from a British yardarm. Their bodies left to rot as warning. The battle erupted in thunder. Cannons roared, smoke rolled across the deck. The sea boiled with iron. The Swallow answered in kind, her broadsides tearing through rigging and men alike. Shouts, screams, the acrid stench of powder filled the air. Roberts stood at the quarterdeck, visible to all, his crimson coat bright even through the smoke. He barked orders, calm, unshaken, as if the roar of cannons were no louder than gulls on the wind. His composure steadied the men, gave them courage. Reload. Fire again. The Revenge bucked as her cannons answered, iron slamming into the Swallow's hull. Splinters flew, men screamed, the sea foamed red. For hours the battle raged, neither side giving quarter. But the British were relentless, their guns more numerous, their crews trained for war. Slowly, inch by inch, they pressed closer. And then it happened. A single shot, fired through the smoke, whistled across the deck. It struck Roberts clean in the throat. He staggered, eyes wide, blood spilling down his crimson coat. For a moment, silence fell, as though the sea itself held its breath. Then Roberts collapsed, his body crumpling to the deck, crimson soaking crimson. Thatcher froze, disbelief flooding him. The man who had stood like stone through every storm, who had carved an empire from chaos, now lay gasping, his eyes glazing. The crew roared in fury and fear. Some fought harder, desperate to avenge him. Others faltered, their courage broken. Without Roberts, the articles meant nothing, the discipline shattered. But even in death, Roberts commanded. His officers seized his body, wrapped it in sailcloth, and hurled it overboard. They would not let the British take him. Better the sea claim him than the gallows. The men howled as his body vanished into the waves, swallowed without ceremony. The sea, as Roberts had always said, takes her own. The battle raged on, but the heart was gone. The Revenge fought bravely, but the British pressed harder, their guns merciless. One by one, Roberts's ships faltered, captured or sunk. The empire of Black Bart crumbled in smoke and fire. Its crimson order shattered. Israel Thatcher fought until his arms ached, until the deck was slick with blood. But in the end, he too was seized, bound in chains, dragged before British officers who sneered at the pirates like vermin, as he was hauled below deck. Thatcher cast one last glance at the sea. He thought he saw a flash of crimson beneath the waves, a coat swirling in the depths, eyes still burning with defiance. Perhaps it was only a trick of smoke and blood. Perhaps not. The empire was gone, but the legend was born. The guns had fallen silent. The decks of the Swallow reeked of smoke, blood, and victory. The sea that had so often obeyed Roberts now lay calm, as if mocking him. The man who had captured 400 ships, who had turned piracy into empire, was hurled into the depths by his own men, claimed by the ocean he had ruled, but his death was not the end. Israel Thatcher, bruised and bound, was dragged below deck with scores of others. The surviving pirates sat shackled in the darkness, their eyes hollow, their futures written in noose and gallows. They whispered to each other, not of escape, they knew there would be none, but of Roberts. "Did you see him fall?" One muttered, his voice trembling. "They say he smiled when the ball struck," another whispered. "Nay," growled a third. "He didn't die. He can't. The sea keeps him." Thatcher said nothing. He had seen the blood, the body wrapped and hurled into the waves. Yet in the smoke of battle, in the chaos of defeat, he had thought he glimpsed something crimson sinking into blackness, a glint of eyes that did not close. Was it truth? Or was it the madness of grief? The days that followed were a blur of chains and curses. The pirates were herded ashore in Cape Coast, marched through jeering crowds, then locked in stone cells. The governors who had once trembled before Roberts now strutted proudly, their letters to London filled with boasts of victory. Trials were swift, merciless. The articles that Roberts had enforced so fiercely were now used as evidence of their guilt. "See how they governed themselves," the judges said, waving the parchment. They were not fools, but traitors to every crown. Discipline makes them more guilty, not less. One by one, the sentences fell. Death, death, death. Dozens were hanged, their bodies swaying in the tropical sun, left to rot as warnings. Some wept, some prayed, others spat defiance until the rope snapped their necks. Thatcher watched them from his cell, each drop hammering dread into his chest. His turn would come. He knew it, but fate, like the sea, is never simple. When Thatcher was brought to trial, a curious twist spared him. The judges, weary from endless hangings, sought to make an example of mercy. This one, they declared, was but a common sailor. Let him live to tell the tale, so others may fear the rope. And so Thatcher lived, though sometimes he wished he hadn't. He was shipped to England in irons, displayed in chains like a beast. Crowds gathered to gawk at him, to spit, to jeer. Children pointed, men cursed, women clutched their crosses. Thatcher endured it all in silence, his mind haunted by memories of smoke and crimson. At night, he dreamed of Roberts. He saw him at the rail, eyes blazing, coat gleaming, his voice calm as thunder. He heard him whisper, The sea takes her own. He woke, gasping, the sound of waves echoing in his skull. Years passed, but the legend did not fade. Merchants still told tales of Roberts's cunning, of how he took fleets without firing a shot. Sailors swore his ghost stalked the Atlantic, crimson coat glowing beneath the moon. Some claimed to see his flag death, toasting with the hourglass, flying from phantom masts in storms. Ships vanished, they said, not to pirates, but to Roberts himself. Risen from the deep Thatcher, grown old and scarred, kept mostly silent. Yet sometimes, in dark taverns, he would speak when the rum flowed deep. He told of the articles, of the discipline, of the man who had turned chaos into empire. He told of the day Roberts fell, and how the sea swallowed him whole. And when men leaned close, wide-eyed, he whispered what haunted him most. I saw his eyes beneath the waves. They were open. The taverns fell silent at those words. Sailors crossed themselves, muttered prayers, and hurried away. For Roberts was more than a man. He had become a myth, a warning, a ghost on the water. Kings killed him, but legends cannot be hanged. And Thatcher knew, deep in his bones, that the crimson devil still ruled the sea. Perhaps not in flesh, but in fear. His articles lived on, copied by other crews, whispered in holds, scratched on parchment that smelled of salt and blood. His flag still haunted men's dreams. His legacy was ink and iron, blood and law, a shadow stretching across the horizon. One stormy night, years after his capture, Thatcher stood on a cliff in Wales, staring out at the roaring Atlantic. The wind tore at his hair, the rain lashed his face. Far out, lightning split the sky, and in that moment, for a heartbeat, he swore he saw it. A black sail, a crimson coat at the rail, a skeleton flag snapping in the storm. He blinked, and it was gone, but the heartbeat lingered, slow and steady, echoing through the waves. Roberts was gone. Roberts was eternal. The sea takes her own, and sometimes it gives them back. Bartholomew Roberts captured more ships than any pirate in history. He ruled the waves not with chaos, but with law, his articles binding rogues tighter than kings ever could. His death shattered his empire, but his legend only grew. To this day, sailors whisper that his ghost sails still. Crimson coat gleaming beneath the moon, his flag snapping in storms. Was Roberts a man? Or did he become something more, an echo of order and terror that the sea itself refuses to release? If you thought Black Bart's tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story. Darker, stranger, and closer to truth than you dare imagine. Subscribe and join me as we plunge back into the forbidden waters of history.